I am so excited and honored to have this very special guest on the Venture Love podcast. For our listeners, you'll absolutely want to check Brooke Schärli out. Brooke is a PhD student studying the psychology of violence and criminal behavior with a master's degree in criminal justice. She has worked in both the legal and tech world, managing security, and also dedicated 4 years of service in the Marine Corps. And even though all of that is so incredibly impressive, what I personally find most admirable about Brooke is just how down to earth, caring, and powerful she is. She's also a true friend, and I'm super duper lucky to have you in my life and so grateful to have you on the show. So welcome to the show, Brooke.
I am honored to be here. Thank you so much, Violet. I'm so happy that you chose to interview me. So let's get started.
Awesome. So Brooke, as I stated, is a woman of many, many talents, and I think you'll have to have her in your life to just really get a good glimpse of just how amazing she is. So what I wanted to dedicate today's episode on is actually a really, really important topic for many people, especially parents, and that is child safety. It's a huge one that I've been learning about over the years, and more so through my conversations with Brooke. So even before becoming a mom, you knew just how strongly I felt about keeping not just my baby safe, but all babies safe. And so just a quick note to anyone listening to this episode. If you have your little ones around, I recommend putting on your headphones, as some of the topics we'll cover today might be graphic or difficult for a younger audience to hear. So my first question to you, Brooke, is what made you want to study what many people might consider to be such a heavy and challenging topic, such as the psychology of violence and criminal behavior?
So backtrack a little bit. I remember 100% your concerns on child safety as you were always wanting to be a mom, and now that you are a mom. So I admire that you do see a lot of beauty in this world. You're my pocket full of sunshine,
Yeah.
because unfortunately my worldview is a bit more opposite and pessimistic. But then again, this is also why I'm in this field. And having you as a friend balances that worldview. So thank you for that. You did mention before the interview that there are scary places and that we should talk about the dangers of social media, specifically with certain platforms. Growing up, I had a strict upbringing. My father, he had his reasons why I was not allowed to do quote unquote whatever I wanted. I thank him for that now. But I had indefinite trust in my father. He was open and had those conversations with me very early on. He was clear that if someone, ever touched me a certain way or made me feel uncomfortable, harassed me, bullied me, it could be a teacher, it could be a friend, it could be your neighbor, it could be anyone. So don't just trust, and to let him know. I think that was very powerful, because that bond that we created, I knew from then on that I could tell my father anything and everything, and to not feel ashamed, but also that sadly the world is not full of sunshines and rainbows,
Yeah.
except for you, Violet. And so this talk about stranger danger mentality actually is not really accurate, because it's not a stranger, it's the people that are closest to you that will sometimes often abuse your child, and abuse them sexually as well, because they're a person of power. So this stranger danger mentality is false. Usually abuse is propelled by someone the child already knows. With that said, who can you trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
The sexual exploitation of children online, and how someone can randomly communicate with a child, is very important to discuss. My father had that convo too with me, and 1 out of every 6 or 10 kids. Let's be what is it? Conservative. 1 out of 10 will get some kind of invitation. So imagine you're a little boy, girl, then they getting that, and if you haven't had that conversation with them, they might send a picture of their body parts without knowing. since I was a child, I've always wanted to be a Marine. And so I became one. And I want to continue serving in the civilian sector as best as I can. But I do have a lot to learn about criminal behavior, security. And so I rely on other experts in the field. I can never go back to a job that isn't mission driven, hence why I made a huge reset in my life last year to study this topic that is so sensitive. Fast forward to today, I've always been interested in understanding why people like my father are so vigilant, right? I think you said your parents were also like that.
Oh my gosh.
Why are they pessimistic? Why is it that they don't just go on with Johnny? have a nice date
Yeah.
at age 13 or whatever.
Mhm.
So early on, that's the world that I grew up on. Maybe that's a sad thing, I don't know, but I'm using that to my benefit to hopefully make people more aware. This degree will allow me to understand the gray zones of violence. I think it's important to fully understand criminal behavior and violence because
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that go south when people who do not possess the credibility start throwing out policies and rules and regulations that don't necessarily protect the public, like children, our families, our household. So
Mhm.
it's up to us to be safe.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Brooke. I think that it takes like a really, really brave and strong person to study this and to make this like your life's mission to help other people. Because sadly, I think a lot of people turn the other way. Like they don't believe it. I think it's sad to say, but in terms of like child endangerment and exploitation and sex trafficking, it's just a horrible, tragic, but real thing that we're all facing in this world. I mean, I wrote a blog on this uh, months ago about how I could have potentially been a kidnapped, exploited child. I don't know if I would be here today if it wasn't for my dad, who dropped the groceries to grab my hand before this man snatched me and ran away. And I was only 2 years old when we lived in Los Angeles, and this happened. And this happens quite more often than we think. I don't think that the news really shares not even a tiny percentage of it. Like, not much of this is shared or exposed. And so I also want to share that, growing up, like you mentioned, as a kid, I felt frustrated with my mom, because it was mainly my mom, right? I used to hate that I could never hang out with my friends. I could never just like be like the other kids, that they were told to be home before dark. Like, that was not a thing. It was, we were picked up by my mom. We were dropped off and picked up and dropped off. And if it wasn't my mom, it was some adult, my dad, someone that we knew, that we trusted, a family member. And I hated that. I hated that so much as a kid, because I felt so overprotected and over sheltered. And looking back, I was only allowed to stay at one sleepover in my entire life. And that was only after my mom literally interviewed the mom and asked, are there any men in this house? Who lives in this house? Who are the people in this house? And so I say that just to say that I understand the feeling of being the child in an overly protective home, but now as an adult, and now even more so as a mom, I thank my mom, because I know the dangers are so real, and I'm so appreciative of her vigilance, like you said, her vigilance and wanting to protect us and wanting to care for us. Because what I've learned in reading and all the things I've read and through talking to you is that it isn't that just, yeah, sure, it is some stranger danger, but it's the uncle. It's not just men too. It's the neighbor or the aunt or the teacher that's meant to protect the kids. It's people that which is just so infuriating. And there's so many layers of this that I can, that we can dive deeper into, but yeah, there's just so much on this topic. I wish we could spend more time on, but I think for parents like me, right? for parents like me who want to do their best to protect their kids, even as a baby, as they grow up, I guess my question to you is, what are some tips, or what is some advice that you know personally through your studies or through your exposure in this field that would really be so crucial for parents like us to say, like, oh my God, this is what I need to know to keep my baby safe, to keep my kids safe? What would those be for you?
So that's a really good question because there's so much out
Yeah.
there, right? And parents are busy. I mean, I admire parents. That's why I'm not a parent, because I can't do that job right now. Um, you become 100% selfless once you have a child and you have a family.
Mhm.
So my number one advice at the top of the list is to look at Bark Technologies. Check it out. I understand that you can't just shelter your kid and say you're never having a phone. That's also wrong and extreme. Of
Yeah.
course, there are extenuating circumstances like your child could have a medical issue, or specific types of contacts that they need to have and reach out in case of an emergency. So your kid might need a phone, and that's okay. At what age, that depends on the maturity of your child. Are they honest with you, trust, respect their parents, to tell them, hey, if they get something, will they tell you?
Mhm.
Maybe not. So with that said, Bark Technologies does have a phone that allows you to track what your child is doing, where your child is, and you can incrementally, step by step, put in an app that they can look into and explore, but you have control over that, not them, and you see what they're doing. I am not an expert in Bark Technologies, but I 100% parents to look into it. It is my understanding that no other phone company does that right now. I could be wrong. These tech companies with their social media platforms have complicated safety, just just safety technology, right? And they're not all safe. That sounds like an oxymoron, but there's things to turn off and turn on, and as a parent, you're busy. So I recommend protectyoureyes.com. They will break down all the apps and give you the resources you need and the dangers to watch out for with each platform. It just simplifies your life. You can buy drugs on Snapchat, Facebook. There's bullying, child suicide rates have increased, and invitations for extortion just keep increasing every year. Almost, I think it should be an epidemic. Unfortunately, it doesn't get that much media coverage, but it is. So protectyoungeyes.com will give you the tools you need to know what to turn off and on with certain platforms and what to watch out for. So highly recommend that. It'll make your life easier. You don't need to be a coder for that. I think another very important tip is don't get complacent and don't assume that nothing will happen to your child.
Mhm.
Please watch, I dare you to watch, Social Media Dangers, Childhood 2.0 by Bark Technologies. I dare you, if you think my kid would never do this, my school would never do that, please watch it and you'll be surprised. Also, talk to your kids about bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, abuse, extortion. Have these conversations with them and know what they are doing on social media with their phones. You're in charge. You pay that bill. That's
Mhm.
where the Marine comes out. Like, if I have a kid, good luck. I'm gonna know everything that
Oh
kid is
God.
doing. Unless they pay the phone bill, right?
Yeah.
Don't assume they know what's good to do and not to do. I think that's already when you assume that. Build that bond. So if a child has a so-called friend requesting a phone of their private parts, genitalia, that
Mhm.
they're gonna come to you and say, "Hey, Dad, Mom, what's this? Do I send this?" Or I remember you told me, "Hey, if this happens, I come to you," so that they don't feel ashamed or broken because of that. Remember, let's be conservative. 1 out of 10 will get that. So,
Mhm.
so there's also it's not wrong to have that conversation. I guess document everything that happens. If your kid does get bullied, screenshot. Remember, there are messages that delete. Document as much as you can.
Mhm.
And last but not least, I do recommend Gavin de Becker. There's a book called The Gift of Fear. Um, Highly recommend it. In the back, he talks about the things to ask your school and see if they have it, um, along other types of things. In essence, using your intuition, not just trusting the babysitter that comes to your house.
Mhm.
Those
Oh
are my
my gosh.
tips.
So good. Those are so good. I haven't heard of any of those. So I'm really happy that you shared them because I think, for any parents listening, even if you don't have kids, I think if your goal is at some point to become a parent, having this in your brain, in the back of your mind, and thinking like, hey, at some point, these resources are going to be so valuable. I think it is so important. It's not to be paranoid. Some people confuse paranoia for protection or for vigilance. And now at this age and being a parent, like I mentioned, is like it's so important to consider all these different things. I mean, the last thing I recently read about was another way that predators access your child is through gaming. Video games, like messaging, any kind of platform where you can message a child, even through, apparently there's apps for children that predators will access as well, pretending to be another 10-year-old or 12-year-old or whatever age they are. And then luring them to meet up, at the park or like the playground. And then, we don't want to consider or think about what happens next, but we all know it's not something good or safe. And I also want to touch on, technology is so important, but I think the biggest takeaway that I'm getting from you from this conversation is as much technology there is, I think at the bare minimum, like the most important thing is the bond that you have with your kid, because cell phones will come and go, apps will come and go, but like the relationship that you have with your baby, because that's how I see my son. He's like my baby, and no matter how big he gets, how old he gets, he's always going to be like my little baby, right? Like the bond that I build with him into the future is going to be so important. And not just myself, obviously, like Vito, my husband as well, and the people that we bring into his life is just like how I just want him, and I'm sure every parent feels the same. You just want your child to come to you, to feel safe coming to you. And I think another thing that is coming up for me right now is feeling comfortable talking to your children about stuff that is uncomfortable. I know growing up in a Latin household, we talked about things, but some things were like, we don't talk about that, or like, we don't want to deal with that, or we don't talk about sex, or we don't talk about this and that. But I think it's important to have those open conversations so that your child does feel safe coming to you. I mean, my dad would talk to me all the time. He would drop us off at school, and every day, don't smoke, don't drink. Who is that guy? Like, he was curious, and I was like, oh, this is so annoying. Like, I don't want to tell my dad this stuff. but that bond is what to this day makes me feel like I can tell him anything, and it's so important. So I'm so happy that you mentioned that.
No, thank you. No, you're absolutely right. Hey, like our parents, they're not perfect, but they did something right to get us here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I value everything that you said, because it's so important. And I think, like, even if it only impacts one parent, one child, it's done a huge service in keeping that person safe and keeping that child safe. So I loved having you as a guest. I feel like I want to have you a million more times, because there's like a world of knowledge that you have that I don't. And I think that, the listeners can value from having you on. One final question I like to ask all of my guests now is, what does it mean to venture a life that you love?
Oof, great question. For me, venturing a life you love means giving back, serving, making a difference in this world. Fortunately, I have you to keep me on track so I can continue on that venture and not get lost or stuck. I think this is common for a lot of veterans. We don't know. I, at least when you gave me this question, I was like, what is this venture into something I love, you know? But that's why I appreciate you having me here, and it also means taking care of myself, right? So I can continue and help others, hopefully.
Mhm. I love that. Awesome answer. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And so for anyone that wants to connect with you, that wants to be in your world, to learn from you, to speak with you, how can people connect with you? How can people find you?
Okay, well, I don't add strangers on my Instagram, so there you go. And whoever does get to know me will, I'll look into it. But if you can find me on LinkedIn, it's Brooke Schärli, parentheses Gutierrez. You'll know it's me because it'll say USMC veteran. But also, if anyone does have legitimate questions, have them follow up with you and you can connect us.
Mhm.
Again, I'm constantly learning. I do want to credit all the people out there who are actively trying to catch these quote bad guys that exploit children. They're behind enemy lines and they're doing this 24/7. They're the ones that I really want to thank. And also all the knowledge from Bark Technologies. Some heroes don't wear capes. Just to backtrack really quickly on your question, you said, how do I have this conversation with my child? There's guidelines on that in that platform. So perfect.
Awesome. 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 And I will grab all of the recommendations and the links and the tips that Brooke shared, and I'm going to post them on my social media channels and in the podcast show notes so that whoever's listening can access those links. And I'm just so, so grateful for you, your time, your expertise, and just for being here with us and sharing. So thank you so much, Brooke.
Thanks, Violet.